The city skyline glittered behind the glass walls of Reynolds Automotive like a crown of steel and ambition, each skyscraper reflecting the kind of power most people only saw in movies. Inside the headquarters, everything was designed to remind visitors exactly who ruled here. The floors were polished marble, the ceilings high and intimidating, the lighting cold and precise. No warmth, no comfort, only authority. This was the world of Victoria Reynolds, a woman who built her empire with intelligence sharpened by arrogance and success fueled by control. At 38, she was already a legend in the automotive tech industry, praised by magazines as a visionary, and feared by employees as unforgiving. She believed weakness was a disease, and empathy was a liability. Today, however, something unforgivable had happened inside her kingdom. Her most valuable prototype, a limited edition hybrid engine designed to redefine the future of transportation, was completely dead. Engineers surrounded the vehicle in silence, their tablets filled with diagnostics that made no sense, their faces pale with fear. One by one, they had tried. One by one, they had failed. Victoria stood with her arms crossed, jaw clenched, heels planted firmly against the marble floor, her presence alone enough to suffocate the room. She hated failure more than anything, especially when it embarrassed her. The engine represented her reputation, her intelligence, her dominance. And right now, it was humiliating her in front of her own people. So let me understand this clearly, she said slowly, her voice calm in a way that made it even more dangerous. You're telling me that the best engineers in this building, the people I pay millions, can't fix a machine I funded, designed, and trusted you with? No one answered. The silence was thick, heavy, almost painful. One engineer swallowed hard. Another avoided eye contact. Finally a senior technician spoke, his voice trembling. We've tried everything, Miss Reynolds. The engine architecture is conflicting with itself. The AI module is overriding mechanical feedback. It's a failure. Victoria interrupted coldly. And failure is unacceptable. She turned away, staring at the lifeless machine as if it had personally betrayed her. Outside the glass walls, executives and investors waited nervously, unaware that the future they had bet on was collapsing in real time. That was when the doors opened. The sound was soft, almost unnoticed, but the presence that entered did not belong in this polished world. A man stepped inside wearing dark, worn overalls marked with oil stains that told a story of years spent fixing what others had given up on. His boots were scuffed, his hands rough, his posture calm. He did not look impressed, he did not look intimidated. His name was Marcus Hill, though very few people in this building would ever bother to ask. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He didn't belong to this world of glass and ego. He had been called in quietly by a junior engineer who had heard rumors. Whispers from underground racing circuits and forgotten garages where impossible machines were brought back to life by a man who listened to engines like they were alive. Marcus paused just inside the room, taking everything in with quiet observation. He noticed the fear on the engineers' faces. He noticed the arrogance in the architecture. And he noticed Victoria Reynolds before she noticed him. Whispers began immediately. Who is that? Why is he dressed like that? Is he lost? Victoria turned at the sound, her sharp eye glowing as they landed on Marcus. She looked him up and down, slowly, deliberately, as if evaluating a defective product. Her expression shifted into something between amusement and disbelief. Can I help you? She asked, her tone dripping with superiority. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. I was asked to take a look at the engine. A laugh escaped her lips, loud enough to echo through the room. It wasn't laughter born of humor. It was laughter meant to cut. You, she said. You're a mechanic. The word mechanic rolled off her tongue like an insult. She stepped closer, heels clicking sharply. This isn't a roadside breakdown. This is a prototype worth more than your entire garage. The engineers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcus remained still, calm, respectful, silent. Victoria circled him slowly, like a predator amused by prey. Let me guess, she continued, self-taught. No formal degree. Learned everything with grace under your nails. She smiled, enjoying the power imbalance. Tell you what, she said, raising her voice so everyone could hear. If you fix this engine that my elite engineers couldn't, then I'll marry you. The room froze. Time itself seemed to pause. A few nervous laughs escaped, unsure whether this was a joke or something worse. The insult wasn't just personal. It was public, it was layered with class, with race, with cruelty disguised as confidence. A billionaire CEO mocking a black mechanic in front of the people who feared her most. Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him. This was the moment where most men would walk away. Where pride would demand anger, where dignity would require silence. Instead, Marcus nodded once. "Deal," he said calmly. The laughter died instantly. Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting compliance. "What did you say?" "I said deal," Marcus repeated. "But when I fix it, I want everyone here to remember what you said." Something shifted in the room. Victoria's smile tightened. "You have 1 hour," she said coldly. "Don't waste my time." Marcus walked toward the car, every step echoing with quiet confidence. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms marked with old scars, burns, cuts. Reminders of battles fought in places no boardroom could understand. As he opened the hood, the engineers watched in disbelief. He didn't start with diagnostics. He didn't ask questions. He listened. He closed his eyes for a moment, resting his hand gently on the engine as if feeling its heartbeat. To Victoria, it looked ridiculous. To Marcus it was necessary. Machines spoke. Most people just didn't know how to listen. He began disconnecting components that the engineers had insisted were untouchable. "That voids the entire system," one whispered. Marcus didn't respond. His fingers moved with precision, not rushed, not hesitant. Victoria crossed her arms, watching closely now, irritation slowly giving way to curiosity. Minutes passed, sweat formed on Marcus's brow, the silence grew unbearable. Then he stopped. He straightened slowly and looked up at Victoria. "You built something powerful," he said calmly. "But you forced intelligence where balance was needed. This engine isn't broken, it's confused." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Fix it," she said sharply. Marcus nodded and returned to work. He rewired feedback loops, recalibrated sensors manually, bypassed AI overrides that had been choking the mechanical core. It was a conversation between man and machine, skill and intuition. Then, without warning, he stepped back. "Start it." An engineer hesitated, then pressed the ignition. The engine roared to life, smooth, powerful, perfect. Gasps filled the room. Engineers stared in disbelief. One dropped his tablet. Victoria's face drained of color. Marcus wiped his hands on a cloth and turned to her. "You don't owe me marriage," he said quietly. "But you owe me respect." The room was silent. Victoria said nothing. For the first time in her life, she had no words. And somewhere deep inside her empire, a crack had formed. She had laughed at the wrong man. And this was only the beginning. The silence that followed the engine's flawless roar felt heavier than the failure that had come for it. No one moved. No one spoke. The sound of the machine still echoed faintly in the glass and steel chamber, like a truth that refused to be ignored. Engineers stared at the dashboard in disbelief, rechecking numbers that no longer contradicted themselves. The prototype purred with a confidence that mocked the hours of confusion and fear that had dominated the room. Marcus Hill stood quietly beside the car, wiping his hands, his breathing steady, his face calm. He did not celebrate. He did not smile. To him, the victory was simply the result of listening when others only commanded. Victoria Reynolds remained frozen, her arms still crossed. Her mind racing faster than the engine she had just seen resurrected. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar tightening her chest, uncertainty. She had built her career on never being wrong, never being challenged in public, never being made to feel small. And yet, in front of her employees, investors, and the machine she worshipped, a man she had mocked without hesitation had exposed the limits of her world. She cleared her throat, straightening her posture, reclaiming the authority she wore like armor. "How did you do that?" she asked, her voice controlled but strained. Marcus met her gaze without arrogance. "I didn't force it," he replied. "I worked with it." The answer irritated her. It wasn't technical. It wasn't corporate. It wasn't something she could turn into a bullet point for investors. It was human. Engineers began murmuring among themselves, throwing around theories and explanations, desperate to regain relevance. Victoria silenced them with a raised hand. "Everyone out," she said sharply. "I need the room." One by one, they left, some glancing back at Marcus with newfound respect, others with envy. When the doors finally closed, the room felt different. Smaller, more intimate, more dangerous. Victoria turned slowly, studying Marcus like a puzzle she hadn't chosen to solve. You embarrassed me, she said flatly. Marcus didn't deny it. You embarrassed yourself, he replied. The words landed without cruelty, but they cut deeper than anger ever could. Victoria exhaled sharply. You think you know me? She snapped. I know engines, Marcus said. People aren't much different. That only frustrated her more. She gestured toward a nearby chair. Sit, she ordered. Marcus hesitated, then sat, not because she commanded it, but because the conversation mattered. Victoria paced as she spoke, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. You don't belong here, she said. People like you don't just walk into my company and expose weaknesses. Marcus looked at his hands, at the scars that mapped his past. I didn't walk in, he said quietly. I was invited. Just not by you. Her curiosity sharpened. Then tell me, she said. Who are you really? Marcus leaned back slightly, his gaze drifting to the engine. Then beyond it, as if looking through time itself. He began to speak, and his voice carried the weight of years spent being invisible. He told her about growing up in a neighborhood where opportunity was a rumor and survival was a skill. About a father who worked 2 jobs fixing cars during the day and broken dreams at night. A man who taught him that machines responded to honesty, not force. About a mother who believed education mattered, even when the world treated them like they didn't. Marcus talked about nights spent in a cold garage, teaching himself by dismantling junk engines others had thrown away. Learning through failure, because no one would teach him otherwise. He spoke of rejection letters from engineering programs that praised his talent but doubted his background. Of investors who smiled politely and then disappeared. Of corporations that took his ideas, refined them, and never returned his calls. Victoria stopped pacing. She listened, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't help it. Marcus's voice didn't tremble. It didn't beg for scented facts. I learned early, he continued. That respect doesn't come from titles. It comes from results. Victoria felt an uncomfortable truth pressing against her pride. Her success had come from opportunity layered on opportunity, from doors that opened because she expected them to. She had worked hard, she knew that, but she had never been invisible. Marcus had lived his entire life on the other side of the glass. So why didn't you leave? She asked quietly. Why keep fixing machines for people who look down on you? Marcus met her eyes. Because engines don't judge, he said. They just respond to how you treat them. The room fell silent again. Victoria looked away first. She hated what she was feeling, admiration tangled with guilt. Curiosity fighting control. She straightened, masking it all. You made your point. She stated. You'll be compensated. Marcus stood. I didn't come for money, he replied. That stopped her. Then why? She asked. He paused at the door. Because one day, he said, this industry will change, and when it does, people will remember who listened. And who laughed. He left before she could respond. Victoria stood alone in her empire, staring at the machine she once believed defined her power. For the first time, she questioned whether intelligence without humility was strength, or just noise. And deep inside, something she hadn't planned for began to grow: fear. Not of Marcus, but of what he represented. Because she knew now that he wasn't finished. And neither was she. The news didn't spread like gossip, it spread like electricity. Silent but unstoppable, jumping from one connection to another, until it lit up corners of the industry. Victoria Reynolds believed she controlled. Within 48 hours of the prototype's resurrection, whispers became questions. And questions became uncomfortable conversations in boardrooms, that once echoed only with praise for her name. An unnamed, external mechanic, had solved what Reynolds Automotive's elite engineering division could not. No press release mentioned him. No statement clarified what had happened. And that absence only made the story grow teeth. Investors noticed, competitors listened. Engineers inside the company, those who had watched Marcus Hill revive the engine with calm precision, began speaking differently, looking at leadership with eyes that no longer held blind loyalty. Victoria felt it everywhere: in meetings that ran longer than usual, in emails that suddenly demanded explanations, instead of offering congratulations. In the subtle way authority slipped when people realized perfection had been a performance, not a guarantee. Victoria sat alone in her office late one night. The city lights blinking like distant warnings beyond the glass. The engine data glowed on her screen, flawless now. mocking her memory of how close everything had come to collapse. She replayed the moment Marcus had said, "You embarrassed yourself," and hated that the words still had power. She prided herself on emotional discipline. Yet his presence lingered like an unfinished equation she couldn't solve. She told herself he was irrelevant. A skilled outsider who had done his job and disappeared. But deep down she knew better. Men like Marcus didn't just pass through systems. They exposed them. The next morning, she called an emergency executive meeting. Faces filled the long conference table, sharp suits hiding sharper anxieties. "We control the narrative," Victoria said firmly. "There will be no mention of outside involvement." The prototype was always functional. Nothing more. A few executives nodded, others exchanged glances. One finally spoke. "With respect, Victoria, engineers are talking," and someone leaked footage. Her jaw tightened. Footage of what? The screen lit up. Grainy security video showed Marcus under the hood, rewiring components while Reynolds Automotive's logo gleamed behind him. It wasn't dramatic. That was the problem. It showed competence without ego. Skill with the internet loved it. Comments poured in beneath reposts. "Who is this guy? Why wasn't he hired? Looks like real talent doesn't wear a suit." Victoria stared at the screen, fury rising. This wasn't just bad publicity. This was a challenge to the mythology she had built. Across the city, Marcus sat in his modest garage, unaware that his quiet victory had sparked a storm. His world was smaller, grounded in reality, tools laid out with care, engines mid-repair, the radio humming low. He felt it before he saw it though. Calls he didn't recognize. Messages from people who had ignored him for years. Offers that sounded generous but felt hollow. He ignored most of them. Attention had never been his goal, truth was. Then a young man stepped into the garage, eyes wide with admiration. "You're the guy," he said. "The one who fixed the Reynolds engine." Marcus looked up slowly. "Engines break every day," he replied. "People just noticed this one." The man hesitated. "They're saying she's furious." Marcus returned to his work. She should be. Victoria couldn't let it go. Against her instincts she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out personally. Her assistant arranged a meeting under the guise of a consulting discussion. When Marcus arrived at Reynolds Automotive again, the atmosphere had changed. Eyes followed him with curiosity instead of contempt. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked threatened. Victoria met him in a smaller conference room this time. No audience. No theatrics. "I want you on my team," she said without preamble. Marcus didn't respond immediately. "A's what?" he asked. She hesitated. "Consultant. Lead engineer. Name your price." He studied her face, searching for sincerity beneath control. "You want my skill," he said. "Or you want my silence?" The question unsettled her. "Both," she admitted quietly. Marcus shook his head. "That's not how this works." Victoria's patience thinned. "You don't understand the opportunity you're being offered." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I understand power," he said. "And I understand fear. This offer isn't about respect. It's about containment." The words stung because they were true. Victoria stood, her composure cracking. "You think you're untouchable now," she snapped. "This industry eats people alive." Marcus rose as well, calm as ever. "It does," he agreed. "Especially when they mistake control for leadership." He turned to leave. "You had a chance to listen," he added. "You chose to laugh." When the door closed behind him, Victoria felt something slip she couldn't grab back. Outside the company buzzed with unease. Inside the empire trembled, not from an enemy attack, but from a truth it could no longer bury. And somewhere between pride and panic, Victoria realized the most dangerous thing about Marcus Hill wasn't his talent. It was that he refused to be owned. The storm arrived without warning, the way truth always does when it's been ignored for too long. Victoria Reynolds woke to a phone vibrating endlessly on her nightstand, the screen lighting up with names she usually ignored until business hours: board members, investors, public relations executives. Before she answered, she already knew something had broken loose. By the time she reached her office, the building buzzed like a disturbed hive. Employees huddled in quiet groups, conversation stopping abruptly as she passed. Reached her office, the building buzzed like a disturbed hive. Employees huddled in quiet groups, conversation stopping abruptly as she passed. Screens throughout the lobby displayed the same headline looping in different fonts and tones: Mysterious Mechanic Outsmarts Automotive Giants Elite Engineers. Beneath it, a still image captured Marcus Hill leaning over the engine, his face calm, his hands steady. No corporate logo in sight, no polished branding, just a man and a machine. Victoria felt a familiar surge of anger, but this time it was laced with something colder: fear. Inside the executive conference room, chaos reigned. Public relations teams argued over damage control strategies, lawyers debated liability, and investors demanded explanations that no spin could satisfy. "This isn't just a leak," one PR director said nervously. "It's a narrative now. And it's not one we control." Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "Then take control," she snapped. "I don't care how." But control, she was learning, wasn't something that could always be reclaimed once lost. Social media feeds were flooded with clips, commentary, and think pieces dissecting the moment she laughed. The moment she challenged Marcus. The moment the engine came to life. People weren't just celebrating his skill, they were questioning her leadership, her arrogance, her values. For the first time, Victoria Reynolds was being discussed not as a visionary, but as a symbol of everything wrong with corporate power. Across town, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, staring at a laptop he hadn't opened in years. The garage had been unusually quiet that morning, no engines, no radio. Just the weight of attention pressing in from every direction. A journalist had found him. Then another. He had ignored them at first, but the messages kept coming, not accusatory, not invasive, just curious. People wanted to know who he was, where he came from, why he wasn't already running his own company. Marcus thought about his father, about the lessons he had been taught under flickering fluorescent. In a garage that barely stayed warm in winter. He thought about the laughter in Victoria's voice. Finally, he agreed to one interview. Just one. He chose a small independent outlet, not a major network. He didn't want spectacle. He wanted honesty. When the interview aired, it didn't explode, it resonated. Marcus didn't attack Victoria. He didn't name names. He spoke calmly about respect, about listening, about how innovation died when arrogance took over. "I didn't fix the engine because I was smarter," he said. "I fixed it because I treated it like a partner, not a servant." The words spread faster than any accusation could have. Viewers saw themselves in him, people overlooked, underestimated, laughed at. And suddenly, Marcus Hill wasn't just a mechanic. He was a mirror. Victoria watched the interview alone in her office late that night. No advisors, no assistants, just her, the screen, and a truth she could no longer outrun. Marcus didn't humiliate her publicly the way she had humiliated him. And that, somehow, made it worse. Her phone buzzed with a message from the board emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning. She knew what it meant. She had built her empire on control. But control without trust was collapsing under its own weight. The next day she faced them. Men and women who once applauded her ruthlessness now questioning whether it was a liability. "You need to fix this," one said bluntly. "Not the engine. The image." Victoria nodded slowly. For the first time she didn't argue. That evening she did something unthinkable. She went to Marcus's garage, no entourage, no cameras. Just her standing in oil-stained marble heels at the edge of a world she had never respected. Marcus looked up from an engine and froze. "You're lost," he said calmly. Victoria swallowed hard. "No," she replied. "I'm late." The silence between them stretched, thick with history and unspoken words. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. The words tasted unfamiliar. "Not for the engine," she continued. "For the way I treated you." Marcus studied her carefully. "Why now?" he asked. She exhaled. "Because I'm learning the cost of laughter." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She simply stood there, stripped of power, waiting. Marcus wiped his hands and nodded slowly. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's the test." Victoria met his eyes, understanding that whatever came next would change them both. Forever. The air inside Marcus's garage felt heavier than usual after Victoria left, as if her presence had disturbed more than dust and oil. Marcus stood alone for a long moment, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, wondering whether apologies carried weight, when they arrived only after consequences. He had seen powerful people apologize before, often as strategy, rarely as truth. Yet something about the way Victoria had stood there, stripped of her armor, unsettled him. It wasn't weakness he had seen. It was confusion. And confusion in people like her could either birth change or trigger destruction. By the next morning, the world had decided for them. Headlines now speculated about reconciliation, about secret negotiations, about whether Reynolds Automotive would collapse or evolve. Investors wanted stability. The public wanted justice. And somewhere in between, two people from opposite worlds were being forced into the same conversation. Victoria arrived at the board meeting with a calm she didn't fully feel. The room was colder than usual, the faces less forgiving. "We need a new direction," one board member said, "and we need it now." Victoria didn't argue. Instead she surprised them all. "I'm bringing in Marcus Hill," she said. The room erupted. "The mechanic," someone scoffed. Victoria met their gaze steadily. "The engineer," she corrected. "The one who fixed what we couldn't." She laid out her proposal, an independent innovation unit, free from corporate hierarchy, focused on human-centered engineering. Marcus would lead it. Not as a symbol. As authority. Silence followed. Then resistance. But the data didn't lie. The prototype's performance had never been better. Reluctantly, the board agreed, on one condition. "If this fails," one member warned, "it ends your leadership." Victoria nodded. "Then I'll make sure it doesn't." Marcus received the offer in a way no one expected, through a handwritten letter delivered to his garage, not an email drafted by lawyers. It wasn't polished. It wasn't persuasive. It was honest. Victoria acknowledged her mistake, her fear and her need to learn. She didn't ask him to save her company. She asked him to challenge it. Marcus read the letter twice before folding it carefully and setting it aside. He knew accepting would mean scrutiny, resistance, and betrayal from both sides. But he also knew that refusing would mean walking away from a chance to change the system that had laughed at him for decades. He showed up to Reynolds Automotive the following Monday. The reaction was immediate. Some employees welcomed him quietly, grateful for fresh leadership. Others saw him as a threat, a reminder that talent didn't always wear a suit. Marcus didn't try to win them over. He simply worked. He listened. He dismantled inefficient processes the same way he dismantled engines, methodically, without ego. Victoria watched from a distance, fighting the instinct to control. Their meetings were tense but honest. They disagreed often. She pushed for speed and optics. He pushed for integrity and balance. Neither backed down easily. Yet something strange happened in the friction. They started to respect each other. Public scrutiny followed every step. Cameras camped outside the building. Analysts debated whether the alliance was genuine or staged. Marcus faced criticism from his own community, accused of selling out. Victoria faced skepticism from elites who doubted her transformation. Late one evening, after a brutal day of meetings, they found themselves alone in the innovation lab. The city lights reflected off unfinished prototypes, shadows dancing between them. "I don't expect you to trust me," Victoria said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Trust isn't given," he replied. "It's built." She looked at him, really looked at him, not as a solution or a threat, but as a man who had walked through fire without becoming bitter. "You could have destroyed me," she said. "Why didn't you?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Because destruction is easy," he said. "Building something better is harder." The words lingered between them. For the first time, Victoria felt something she hadn't planned for, respect that wasn't forced, and curiosity that wasn't strategic. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something quieter. More dangerous. The beginning of change. And as the world watched, waiting for one of them to fail, an alliance born from doubt began to take shape, fragile, contested. But real success has a way of waking enemies that sleep quietly in the dark. As Marcus's innovation unit began producing results that exceeded projections, the resistance within Reynolds Automotive sharpened into something far more dangerous than skepticism. Efficiency improved, errors dropped, prototypes stabilized, and with every success, certain executives felt their authority slipping. Power, when threatened, rarely confronts openly, it undermines. Marcus sensed it first in small inconsistencies, delayed approvals, missing components, quiet changes to schedules he hadn't authorized. He didn't accuse anyone. He watched. Listening to systems had taught him patience. Listening to people demanded even more. Victoria, meanwhile, was fighting battles on another front. Board pressure intensified as stock volatility followed every rumor. Some praised her bold decision. Others prepared contingency plans for her removal. In private meetings, she defended Marcus fiercely, surprising even herself. "He's delivering results," she said repeatedly. "That's what matters." But doubt crept in when reports crossed her desk suggesting budget overruns and procedural violations tied to Marcus's unit. The numbers didn't match what she had seen. Someone was manipulating the narrative. And if she confronted the wrong person, she could ignite a war she wasn't ready to win. The betrayal revealed itself on a Thursday morning. Marcus arrived to find his lab sealed, access revoked, equipment confiscated. Security avoided eye contact as they handed him a suspension notice citing gross misconduct and unauthorized resource allocation. The words were clean. The intent was not. Employees watched in stunned silence as the man who had transformed their failing systems was escorted out like a criminal. Marcus didn't resist. He didn't argue. He knew the script well. Outside, cameras waited, hungry. He said nothing. Silence was his shield, Victoria found out an hour later. Rage unlike anything she had felt in years burned through her composure. She stormed into the boardroom, slamming the suspension notice onto the table. "Who authorized this?" she demanded. A senior executive leaned back calmly. "It was necessary," he said. "He's destabilizing the company." Victoria laughed bitterly. "By making it better." The executive's smile didn't reach his eyes. "By reminding people they don't need us." The truth landed like a blade. This wasn't about rules. It was about fear. That evening, Victoria went to Marcus's garage again. The lights were again. The radio played softly. Marcus looked tired, not defeated. "You didn't do this," he said before she could speak. She nodded. "But I didn't stop it fast enough." Silence filled the space between them, heavier than before. "They want me gone," Marcus said calmly. "And if I stay they'll come for you next." Victoria's voice broke. "Won't let them." Marcus looked at her steadily. "You may not have a choice." He explained what he had uncovered: data manipulation, internal sabotage, executives leaking misinformation to justify his removal. He had proof. But using it would burn bridges permanently. Victoria closed her eyes. "This will destroy the company," she whispered. Marcus shook his head. "No," he said. "It will reveal it." The decision came at dawn. Victoria stood before the board and did what no one expected. She presented the evidence herself. Names. Transactions. Intent. The room erupted. Accusations flew. Threats followed. When it was over, several executives were removed pending investigation. The stock dipped violently. Headlines screamed chaos. And Victoria Reynolds walked out of the boardroom knowing she had crossed a line she could never uncross. That night, she went to Marcus. Not as a CEO, not as a strategist, but as an equal standing in the aftermath of truth. "I chose," she said simply. Marcus nodded. "So did I." The knife had been exposed. The wound was real. But for the first time, the betrayal hadn't won. The fallout was immediate and unforgiving. Markets reacted before understanding. Headlines screamed before facts could settle, and public opinion fractured into loud, emotional extremes. Reynolds Automotive's stock dropped sharply as news broke of internal corruption, executive removals and leadership turmoil. Analysts called it reckless. Critics called it overdue. Supporters called it courage. Victoria Reynolds watched the numbers fall in real time, knowing each dip represented not just financial loss, but trust being tested. For years she had ruled by certainty. Now she led through chaos. And for the first time, she didn't hide from it. Marcus felt the impact differently. His name flooded social media, not as a rumor this time, but as a symbol. Some hailed him as a hero who exposed corruption. Others accused him of destroying a company from the inside. Old friends worried he had gone too far. Strangers threatened him for daring to challenge power. The garage, once a refuge, became a target. One evening he arrived to find graffiti sprayed across the door, words meant to hurt, meant to warn. He stood there for a long moment, hand resting on the cold metal, remembering every time he had been told to stay quiet, to stay small. He cleaned the door himself, no witnesses, no anger, just resolve. Victoria visited later that night, unannounced. She saw the fresh paint, the tired lines in Marcus's face, and felt the weight of her choice settle fully into her bones. "I didn't know it would reach you like this," she said softly. Marcus met her gaze. "Truth travels fast," he replied. "So does fear." She nodded. For the first time. She didn't try to fix the problem. She simply stayed. They sat on overturned crates, the garage quiet except for distant traffic. "I lost half the board today," she said after a while. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Half," she gave a small, humorless smile. "The other half is waiting to see if I survive." Silence returned, but it was different now, shared, not hostile. Days passed in a blur of investigations, public statements, and sleepless nights. Victoria stepped in front of cameras and did something no one expected. She accepted responsibility. Not deflecting. Not spinning. "I allowed a culture where arrogance replaced listening," she said. "And I am changing it." The words shocked the industry. Some called it weakness. Others recognized something rarer: growth. Marcus watched the broadcast from his garage, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. He hadn't asked her to do that. But it mattered that she did. The pressure took its toll. Victoria collapsed one evening from exhaustion, the weight of the past weeks finally claiming its price. Marcus was the one who stayed by her hospital bed, quiet, steady, refusing to leave when the world demanded answers she couldn't yet give. When she woke, she found him there, eyes tired but unwavering. "You didn't have to stay," she whispered. Marcus shrugged. "Neither did you," he replied. Something shifted in that moment, not romance, not yet, but trust forged through shared cost. They had both paid for standing tall. And they were still standing. When Victoria returned to work, she did so changed. Meetings were fewer. Listening was longer. Decisions were slower, more deliberate. Marcus returned to the innovation unit, this time with full transparency and authority. The employees noticed. The company felt different, wounded, yes, but honest. And in the quiet spaces between chaos and recovery, Marcus and Victoria found themselves talking about things beyond engines and markets. Childhood. The walls between them thinned, not through attraction, but through understanding. The cost had been high. But the foundation beneath them was finally real. The calm after the storm was never as peaceful as it seemed. Reynolds Automotive was recovering, but recovery brought new challenges, not less. Success had a way of inviting scrutiny. And scrutiny had a way of revealing desires we didn't admit even to ourselves. Marcus returned to his unit with authority recognized but never guaranteed. Victoria resumed her CEO role, navigating fragile stability with calculated precision. And yet beneath the surface, something had begun stirring. An unspoken tension neither could ignore. It wasn't romance in the obvious sense. It was more dangerous, more unpredictable, the kind of connection born from shared struggle. Late nights, quiet victories, and the silent acknowledgement of each other's power. It started small. Conversations that once centered on prototypes and deadlines, now lingered on fleeting glances, quiet smiles, and the subtle weight of words left unsaid. Victoria found herself waiting for Marcus to arrive in meetings, noticing the way his presence commanded attention without demanding it. Marcus, in turn, observed her differently, not as a CEO to a subordinate, but as someone shaped by fire, who bore scars of ambition and survival alike. They both understood the stakes. Crossing a line could destroy credibility, invite gossip, and shift power dynamics in unpredictable ways. And yet temptation thrived in the silence between decisions. In the moments when exhaustion softened defenses, and in the shared acknowledgement that both had endured more than the world would ever see. One late evening. The innovation lab was quiet except for the hum of active prototypes. Marcus adjusted a component while Victoria observed, leaning casually against the edge of the workbench. "You don't have to stay late every night," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Some things demand attention," he replied. She studied him in the dim glow of overhead lights, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the focus in his eyes, and the subtle humanity in someone the world usually only saw as capable, unyielding, almost untouchable. "You carry too much," she said quietly. Marcus paused. "And you carry more than you let anyone see," he answered. Neither spoke for a long moment. The quiet was not awkward. It was charged, filled with mutual recognition, a silent dance between respect and something more forbidden. Temptation escalated when the media spotlight turned again. Interviews praised Marcus's genius, and beneath the surface, something had begun stirring. An unspoken tension neither could ignore. It wasn't romance in the obvious sense. It was more dangerous, more unpredictable, the kind of connection born from shared struggle. Late nights, quiet victories, and the silent acknowledgement of each other's power. It started small. Conversations that once centered on prototypes and deadlines, now lingered on fleeting glances, quiet smiles, and the subtle weight of words left unsaid. Victoria found herself waiting for Marcus to arrive in meetings, noticing the way his presence commanded attention without demanding it. Marcus, in turn, observed her differently, not as a CEO to a subordinate, but as someone shaped by fire, who bore scars of ambition and survival alike. They both understood the stakes. Crossing a line could destroy credibility, invite gossip, and shift power dynamics in unpredictable ways. And yet temptation thrived in the silence between decisions. In the moments when exhaustion softened defenses, and in the shared acknowledgement that both had endured more than the world would ever see. One late evening. The innovation lab was quiet except for the hum of active prototypes. Marcus adjusted a component while Victoria observed, leaning casually against the edge of the workbench. "You don't have to stay late every night," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Some things demand attention," he replied. She studied him in the dim glow of overhead lights, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the focus in his eyes, and the subtle humanity in someone the world usually only saw as capable, unyielding, almost untouchable. "You carry too much," she said quietly. Marcus paused. "And you carry more than you let anyone see," he answered. Neither spoke for a long moment. The quiet was not awkward. It was charged, filled with mutual recognition, a silent dance between respect and something more forbidden. Temptation escalated when the media spotlight turned again. Interviews praised Marcus's genius and Victoria's courage, placing them both in a new category: the partnership that had saved a company while challenging a system. Outsiders speculated endlessly about their relationship, about power and intimacy, about what could or should happen. Victoria ignored it publicly, but privately, she felt the scrutiny like heat on her skin. Marcus noticed, but he didn't comment. He allowed her space while being present. The unspoken tension between them growing stronger with each shared glance, each collaborative victory, each quiet acknowledgement that neither was fully alone in this world anymore. The first real test came unexpectedly. A critical prototype malfunctioned. One that threatened months of progress and risked public embarrassment. Marcus was called into a high-level meeting with Victoria and the board. And as they worked through solutions, the room contracted around them. Pressure, deadlines, and the weight of expectation made the air thick. Victoria's hand brushed Marcus's lightly as she handed him a report. Neither pulled away, neither spoke. But the contact was electric. A brief acknowledgement that the connection between them had evolved. Later, alone in the lab, Marcus exhaled slowly, realizing that his feelings were no longer simple admiration or respect. They were deeper, complicated, dangerous, and undeniable. Victoria sensed it too. And in the silence of a space filled with metal, wires, and possibilities, both understood that the next choice, between desire, professionalism, and control, could change everything. The night was quiet, the city lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Reynolds Automotive's Innovation Lab, painting the room in gold and shadow. Marcus worked alone, meticulously adjusting a prototype that had given them trouble for weeks. Every wire, every sensor, every connection demanded attention. Precision was everything, and failure was no longer an option. Victoria stepped quietly into the room, heels muted on the polished floor. She had been watching him for a long time, observing how he moved, how he spoke, how he carried himself as though the weight of the world rested on his hands. But with a grace that belied the burden. She didn't speak immediately, letting the quiet swell, letting it hang between them, thick and charged, like a storm about to break. Finally, she stepped closer. "Marcus," she said softly, voice carrying more than authority, it carrying more admiration, and something unspoken she refused to name. He looked up, meeting her gaze. There was a tension there neither could deny anymore. The kind that had been building for weeks, months even, born from struggle, betrayal, and shared victories. Neither wanted to acknowledge it, yet both could feel it pulsing in the spaces between words, between movements, between the steady hum of the machines around them. "Victoria," he replied, calm yet deliberate. She swallowed, a lump rising in her throat. "You've been carrying so much you don't have to do it alone." His fingers paused on a delicate connection. "Some things," he said slowly, "you carry because no one else can. And some things you choose to share only with the few who deserve it." The air tightened. Each word was deliberate. Each glance heavy with meaning. Neither spoke for a long moment, letting the silence do its work, letting their mutual respect and unspoken attraction weigh on them. The choice came suddenly. A critical system alert flashed red across the main console. One of the prototypes was failing at a rate that threatened to ruin weeks of progress and invite public scrutiny. Marcus froze for a heartbeat, calculating, analyzing, considering every outcome. Victoria stepped closer, standing beside him, her hand hovering near his, not touching, yet almost magnetic in proximity. "Do you want me to handle this?" she asked. It was a professional offer, but laced with something deeper. Marcus's heart thumped in a way he had not expected in years. "I need you with me," he said finally, not just solving the problem but facing it together. Their hands brushed, they adjusted wires and recalibrated sensors. The contact fleeting yet electric, sending heat through both of them. Every glance, every touch, every whispered instruction carried a new weight. In that moment, the boundary between respect, trust, and desire blurred. Hours passed as they worked side by side, solving what had seemed impossible. And when the prototype finally stabilized, performing flawlessly under stress, they both recalled. The room felt different. The crisis had passed, but the tension had not. Marcus looked at Victoria, really looked at her, noticing the wariness under her polish, the humanity beneath her authority. "We did it," he said quietly. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed something else: recognition, vulnerability, acknowledgement that their bond had shifted irrevocably. Neither moved. Neither spoke. And yet, the choice had been made, not with words, but with presence, with trust, with silent admission that they needed each other. More than they had admitted. More than the world could understand. Finally Victoria broke the silence. "We can't not here," she said softly, aware of the precarious balance between professionalism and what simmered beneath. Marcus nodded. "I know. But it's there. And it's real." They stood together in the quiet. Side by side, understanding that whatever came next would test everything they had built. Respect had become intimacy, trust had become reliance. And the unspoken attraction between them had grown into a force that neither could ignore. They had faced betrayal, public scrutiny, and corporate chaos, yet here, in the shadows of their shared victories, they realized the greatest challenge was not the engine, not the company, but the choice between desire and duty. A choice that would define the final chapter of their story. The morning sun cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Reynolds Automotive, scattering golden light across a lab that had seen chaos, betrayal, and transformation. Marcus stood at the center of the room. Hands resting lightly on the engine that had started it all, the prototype that had defined both his skill and the respect he had earned. Every wire, every sensor, every component reflected the countless hours of struggle, late nights, and impossible problem solving. The hum of the machines was steady, confident, almost triumphant. As though they recognized the hands that had revived them. And behind him, Victoria Reynolds entered the lab quietly. Heels soft against the polished floor. Eyes reflecting exhaustion and resolve in equal measure. She didn't need to speak, he felt her presence. And it anchored in a way that no recognition, no title, no corporate success ever could. Victoria approached, stopping just short of him, her gaze sweeping over the room, over the prototypes. Over the people who had stayed loyal through chaos. "They're ready," she said simply, her voice a mixture of relief and pride. Marcus nodded. "We're ready." The partnership that had begun with skepticism, mockery, and challenge had evolved into something stronger, built on trust, mutual respect, and an understanding forged in the fires of adversity. Neither of them spoke about the nights of doubt, the public scrutiny, or the threats that had tested every fiber of their being. They didn't need to. Their silence said more than words ever could. This moment belonged to them both. Yet it belonged also to every person who had been underestimated, dismissed, or laughed at. By mid-morning, the boardroom was filled with executives, investors, and engineers who had once doubted Marcus, who had once whispered behind closed doors. Victoria led the meeting, her tone calm but authoritative, acknowledging past mistakes and presenting a vision for the future that was both bold and realistic. "Innovation isn't about titles," she said, "and it isn't about hierarchy. It's about listening, trusting, and empowering talent wherever it is found. Marcus Hill has proven that. and from this day forward we lead together, with integrity, with courage, and with the knowledge that every challenge is an opportunity to grow." The room erupted in applause, some tentative, some enthusiastic, all recognizing that the company's success was no longer dependent on ego but on collaboration. Marcus watched as Victoria commanded the room. Noticing the subtle shift in her demeanor, the humility mixed with authority, the vulnerability intertwined with strength. When the meeting ended, she approached him in private. "We did it," she whispered. Marcus smiled, a rare, genuine smile, nothing to do with triumph and everything to do with connection. "We did," he replied. Then, in a quiet moment away from the world, Victoria said something she hadn't said before. "I owe you more than respect," she admitted. "For everything, for believing when I couldn't." Marcus's gaze met hers, steady, calm and understanding. "You earned it," he said. The unspoken tension that had hovered between them for weeks dissolved, replaced by a new bond, one not defined by titles, not by ego, not by circumstance, but by mutual recognition and shared victories. The company flourished in the following months. Public trust returned. Investors praised the transparency and innovation. Media outlets highlighted Marcus and Victoria as a duo that had reshaped corporate culture, proving that results came from skill, courage, and integrity rather than posturing or hierarchy. Yet beyond the accolades, the prototype lines, something deeper had taken root. In private, Marcus and Victoria spent late nights side by side, not just collaborating but learning from each other, challenging each other, and quietly acknowledging the bond that had begun with laughter, confrontation, and mutual defiance. They never rushed it, never named it prematurely. They simply allowed it to grow naturally, tempered by the fires they had walked through together. And one quiet evening, after the lab had emptied and the hum of the machines softened to a gentle lull, Victoria stood beside Marcus, looking at the prototype that had changed everything. "You said once," she began, a small smile playing on her lips, "that respect is earned, not owned." Marcus nodded, and, she asked. He turned to her, meeting her gaze fully. "I think we've earned more than respect," he said softly. In that moment, the journey that had begun with mockery, skepticism, and defiance reached its culmination. Not just with professional triumph but with personal understanding. A black mechanic and a female CEO, once adversaries now equals, once challenged, now victorious. Once laughed at, now unstoppable. The engine was running perfectly, but the greater machine, the one built from trust, courage and human connection, was running even stronger. And together, they faced the future, unafraid, unshaken and undeniably united.